Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try to make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we're honored to welcome a remarkable guest, Patti LaFleur. Patti was a care partner for her mother through her dementia. Welcome, Patti.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. So Patti, you suddenly found yourself being a caregiver for your mom. Kind of walk us through the beginning stages of when you started to suspect that mom needed some help, and what was it that she needed help with?
Yeah, so about 8 years ago, we noticed that my mom was having a hard time remembering to give herself insulin. So she has been a type 1 diabetic for 50 plus years. And so she could always manage it really beautifully, but she was forgetting to give herself shots, and she was running high or running low unexpectedly. And so we started to notice that it was becoming challenging for her to remember to give herself her insulin. In addition, she just was sad more often. She was crying more. She was withdrawing. And so we noticed that there was some things going on, and we took her to the doctor, and she got diagnosed with dementia, mixed dementia, actually, about 8 years ago. My dad was able to care for her for a while in their home together, but about 3 years ago, I stepped in and began caring for her pretty much full time. For about the first 6 months, I cared for her in their home. I supported my dad. I would go there every day, but I would support him in caring for her. And then about 2.5 years ago, she required more care, and my dad it was becoming pretty obvious that it was too much for my dad. So she moved in with me, and I cared for her up until her passing a couple months ago.
Okay. Well, sorry to hear about her passing. Now, when we spoke previously, you use a phrase that some viewers and listeners may not be as familiar with as the phrase caregiver. You call it care partner. And why don't you explain why you use that phrase instead of a caregiver?
For sure. To me, I think that language is really important. So I think that the intentionality around the words that you choose matters. And so for me, when I'm thinking about the relationship that I had with my mom, it was a partnership. It wasn't that I was just giving all this care to her or she was only receiving. There was give and take in our relationship. Even in the later stages of her dementia, we still shared love. So without her being an equal part of this partnership, it wouldn't have been successful. So I use the word care partner because to me, that described what it looked like for us in the caregiving role. It was so much give and take. Yes, there were times that I was giving so much more and she was on the receiving end, but there were also times where she would do something and then I would have to be responsive to it. So to me, it was just a total partnership between the two of us.
And I think, and I like that phrase, care partner. We use that frequently ourselves with the families that we help. And I think it also signifies a psychological benefit because, caregiving or any type of giving signifies a one-way relationship. You're always giving and never getting anything out of it, which even with caregiving, you are getting a lot out of it. The rewards and the benefits of, shared memories, shared moments and experiences. But when you set it up from the beginning as a partnership, it signifies almost like an equal relationship rather than one person over the other or vice versa. So I think that's really great that you took that approach from the beginning, having it be a partnership rather than just a giving relationship. Now,
Totally. also gives her some agency in it, right?
Right.
Like I'm using that language with her. It helps to preserve her dignity, which is the goal of dementia care.
Yeah. And that's so important. We talk all the time about, it's the illness or the disease. It's not the person. And so many times people that are new to it or are not, as familiar with dementia or any type of long-term, issue, they immediately, almost maybe intended or unintended, give that person's up, give them up. They're no longer who they were and everything is over, which nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, we talk to families and professionals all the time where these individuals who, and we'll use dementia as the example, they get this diagnosis and all of a sudden they discover a new hobby and they become tremendous painters, or they discover this beautiful, singing voice that they didn't realize they had or they hadn't used in many years. So, it's part of the person, but it's not the whole person, right? And so I think, maintaining that integrity and that respect for that person and their individuality is very crucial as part of the care partnership that, families go through.
Yes, I agree.
So now you explained that your mom had multiple or mixed dementia. Why don't you explain for viewers and listeners who may not be familiar with that? Because as you know, Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. Then people may have heard of Lewy body or frontal temporal, but you don't hear that word mixed dementia very often. So explain to our viewers and listeners what that meant for your mom and what that diagnosis of mixed dementia is.
Yeah. So for my mom, they did an MRI in order to further understand what kind of dementia she had. And what came from the MRI was that she did have some brain loss in multiple areas. So the doctor wasn't really able to pinpoint it as Alzheimer's or pinpoint it as Lewy body. They noticed that there were brain changes in many areas of her brain. And so that's what gave her the diagnosis of mixed dementia. And what that meant for us is kind of a big question mark, right? There's a lot of research out there on Alzheimer's because it is the most common form. And so a lot of the articles or the information that you can receive is about Alzheimer's. But for my mom, there was stuff kind of going on in all areas of her brain. So it became a big question mark, but it was good for us to have that understanding because then we could, if there was something that happened that was kind of atypical of a dementia diagnosis, we were able to potentially say, like you were saying, like, it's not her, it's the disease, right? So it's not her acting a certain way or her being overly emotional or her withdrawing. It's the disease. And because there's not as much research or information about mixed dementia, we were able to use that as something for us to kind of justify what was going on.
Right. And what was the progression like for your mom? Because, as you're probably aware, people with a diagnosis of dementia, regardless of the type, they all have different varying forms of the progression. So what was your mom's progression like?
She very quickly went from early stages to middle stages. Very quickly. She quickly became incontinent. She quickly became reliant on us for supporting with lots of things. I think partially because of her diabetes, she required pretty much 24/7 care immediately just because she wasn't able to manage the diabetes. And with not being able to manage your diabetes is also a health risk, right? A life risk, So she did need support in monitoring. And because the support in monitoring happened so frequently with the diabetes, I think that some of her agency got taken away pretty quickly. But I would say she was in the middle stages for 6 years. She did fall towards she fell a year before she passed and broke her hip. So that did progress some things pretty quickly, like the walking became more challenging and she just needed help with more things at that point, and she was in a wheelchair. But and then the late stages for her were really short. I mean, she talked up until her last day. She did like the swallowing and the sleeping a lot. She probably, I mean, pretty quickly had a hospitalization. And then after that, just pretty much stopped eating. So her late stages and her early stages were really short, but her mid stages were very long.
Okay. And did you find that your background as a kindergarten teacher or a teacher helped during this journey?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, in patience, right? Like kindergartners
Sure.
are like nothing else. And I'm used to having 20 of them, 20 to 25 of them, right? Like, so like I'm used to it being busy, and things being a little out of control and people doing things that are not typical, right? Like they're licking the walls, I'm used to those kind of things. Those don't bother me. I'm not even phased anymore, right?
Right.
But as far as in the way that I talk to my mom, the way that I listen to my mom, I think so often people try to rush people, just in general. We live in a fast-paced environment. So we're used to, I ask you a question, you're going to respond immediately, and then we're going to move on. But with dementia, and my mom specifically, if I asked her a question, she needed time to process. Sure. So I was so used to giving time to process, right? Like that was my whole job. Like I'd ask a question. I think I'd give them about 10 to 15 seconds, and then I would want responses, right? So even just the way that I asked questions and the way that I allowed for students and for my mom to respond, that was helpful. I was also used to giving choices, like, would you like this or this? Like I was very strong in my understanding of development and how the brain works. So I was able to really think about where she was and what she was still capable of doing. And I think that is huge. I think so often when people have dementia or Alzheimer's, we get caught up in what they can't do. There's so many things that she was unable to do. Use the bathroom on her own, cook her own meals, but there were things that she was still able to do. Just because she couldn't use the bathroom, she could flush the toilet still. She could help pull up her pants with food. I always had her help me cook. I mean, she wasn't cooking the meal, but she could stir the meat, or she could mix the stuff together or put the seasoning on the potatoes. I was always thinking about what was the task that we were going to do and what was a way that she could contribute. And I think that my education background helped with that.
Absolutely.
And, and in addition, I always was doing crafts and I was always doing little activities. So I had a lot of great tools up my sleeve as far as things that she could attend to that were not too complex, but also were things she could be interested in.
Sure. And I think even just like you use the example of stirring the meat, we tell families if your loved one is just sitting there, and a lot of people, they don't have that patience and they would rather just do it and get it done and not have to. But we say, give them a basket of, socks or T-shirts or towels and let them fold them over and over again, just so they feel like they're contributing and still have some self-identity, because they are still aware of who they are, and having that ability to contribute, I think, plays an important role in their self-identity and their self motivation to want to contribute. What were some of the hardest parts, though, for you being a daughter of being your mother's care partner?
Yeah. Honestly, just losing pieces of my mom. My mom was my best friend. And although she was still there and we still had so much fun together, she wasn't my best friend in the way that I imagined our adult friendship would be. It was also really hard for me to watch her lose pieces of herself. Like I know my mom. I know what my mom wanted with her life. She wanted to be involved with my wedding. She wanted to be a grandma. She wanted to, spend time with her friends. She had all these dreams and aspirations. So watching her lose pieces of herself was equally as hard, if not harder, right? Like I selfishly miss my mom, and I knew that, but like she had to be missing herself. And there were times that she was so emotional and so sad. And I would try to ask her what was going on. And she would point blank say, I'm sad because I don't know why I'm sad. Right. So she was losing herself. And that to me was the hardest part. And in addition, the pandemic was a challenge for all of us. Right.
Sure.
My mom was with me. We were completely isolated, and that was hard. I'm a very social, like outgoing person, but so was she. She loved spending time with friends. She loved going and doing things. And that just all stopped.
So for me, an interesting thing is always when a family member is now the care partner, care provider, supporter for a loved one with any type of long-term care issue, and especially with dementia, because there is no one size fits all for that. How did you learn to kind of adapt and discover how and what to expect? Was it through just doing research? Because being a kindergarten teacher, I'm assuming you didn't have an extensive background in healthcare and a big knowledge of dementia. So, I mean, you're kind of placed in the middle of this with really nothing to lean on or experiences to go by, I'm imagining. So how did you manage that and adapt to that?
I think that one of the biggest keys was the relationship I had with my mom, right? So that I was able to respond to her needs because I knew her so well. So that was a huge advantage that I had, at least from a social emotional standpoint. But as far as knowing what to do, honestly, the internet was my outlook, right? That's where I found my information, besides going to doctor's appointments. But as many people know, doctor's appointments can be helpful, but they're not like, they don't have all the tools. They don't know everything, so it's like we were learning along the way. But yeah, definitely, like social media was really positive, finding other caregivers, learning from other caregivers, different support groups, the Alzheimer's Association website, area of aging. Like I was able, because I'm such a like go-getter, to like use all of those resources I could find out there, but they're kind of hard to find.
Absolutely, they are, and especially at doctors, they're wonderful, but they're not giving the caregiver resources or the care partner resources for the family of what to do and what to expect necessarily that they really need for those day-to-day experiences that they may be going through. What was the most supportive thing for you as her care partner?
The most supportive thing for me as her care partner was the online support system.
Online, sure.
Like I found people on Instagram, and I connected with people on Facebook. I started a little Facebook group for young caregivers, because what I found is I was going to support groups for caregivers, like through the Alzheimer's Association, and they were wonderful.
Right.
But what I found is that there were oftentimes spouses that were there, or it was all spouses, the couple that I went to. And so there was a significant difference between being a spousal caregiver and being a daughter or a son, because of my age. I mean, just as simple as that. And the relationship. I'm not saying one is easier or harder. I think they both are hard in very different ways. But what I found is, because of who I am, I was going to these caregiving support groups, and these people were having things that they needed. And I'm like, oh, I'll help you with that. And that's not what I needed. I needed help, right? So I couldn't really find, at that time, it's changed now with the Alzheimer's Association, but at that time I couldn't find any support groups for people that were like me. So I created a group on Facebook, and we did really informal monthly group, like little support groups. And so it was that was the biggest key for me, was finding people that were similar age to me, a similar place in life, and trying to navigate this.
How about for your mom? What was the most supportive thing for her?
Oh, hands down, she was in this two things actually. She was in an art class and she was in a music class. So she did an art class that was through, it's called Opening Minds Through Art. I think it's like a nationwide program, but they specifically had one in our area. So it's an art class for people living with neurocognitive challenges, and it is incredible. So they do abstract art. It was online. It's actually now shifted to being in person, but it was online and it was incredible. And then she also had music. We had a music therapy once a week with an amazing, our music therapist was amazing. And it was just one-on-one. And those were like the two biggest supports, because these were people that were trained in dementia, right? And so by me sitting with my mom and engaging in these activities with her, I learned tools and strategies just by listening to them,
Right.
the way that they interacted with my mom. I was able to use music as a tool for us when she would be sundowning. I was able to take what we were doing in the art class and then do it in other parts of our day. So those were the two most supportive things.
How did you come up with those ideas for the activities for your mom?
So those ones were like, found them online.
Okay.
And then, like the activity, I did a lot of activities with my mom, and how I came up with ideas for activities is I thought about who my mom was before. What did my mom enjoy doing? She liked puzzling. She liked crafts. She loved holidays, and she really liked sewing, but that got really challenging at the end. But she liked art. She liked crafts. She liked doing those things. So I incorporated those into our daily schedule, and it was phenomenal for her because she was able to keep some skills through the painting and the fine motor and all of those things. But also it was a positive experience that we could share together. I didn't worry about, if we were making a Christmas tree, I didn't worry that she put the star on the top and that the stump was on the bottom. It was however she wanted to do it was okay. There was no right answer. It was all about our experience.
That's one. How was your dad during this time coping with her? Because I imagine, because you mentioned she came to live with you for a while, correct?
Yeah. So once it got too hard for him, he had actually ended up in the hospital.
Okay.
And so she moved in with me. And then in the beginning, when she moved in with me and he had gotten out of the hospital, we were going to his house every day. So I would bring my mom there, and then the three of us would spend the day together at his house. But then he also got a dementia diagnosis as well, vascular dementia. And so it was unsafe for him to live on his own. So he actually moved into an assisted living facility. On the independent side, he was still very early in his dementia diagnosis. And then we were able to just go and visit him there. It was really hard for him. That's his best friend. That's his love. But he knew that by that point, he knew he couldn't care for her anymore. And he was just so thankful that she had me to care for him. And he had the ability to live somewhere and still advocate for himself. He was still, up until he passed in last November, his medication wasn't there at 10 a.m. He was calling down to the office. Like, he was still very much able to, he had a lot of agency and a lot of advocacy still. So he knew at that point that he was in the best place for him, and his wife, my mom, was at the best place for her.
Okay. So what was your mom like growing up?
Lovely. She was just the kind of mom that anyone would want to have. She was unable to have kids. All she ever wanted to do was be a mom. And she actually was unable to have kids. So she adopted me and my sister, and she just was love. Like, I always say that she was sunshine in human form. She was someone that just brightened up the room whenever she walked in it. She was an incredible listener and so supportive. I never doubted that she loved me or she cared. She volunteered in all of my classes. I was in preschool. She was one of the helpers in the preschool class. I mean, she just was the kind of mom and person that anyone would want to be around.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned your sister. Does she live close to you guys? Is she local or is she in a different area?
She lives in a different area. Yeah, she lives out of state. She's been out of state for about 9 or 10 years. So kind of when this all started, she was out of state. She does come up and visit, but she wasn't as involved in their care because of the distance.
Of course. And that's got to be challenging, when you have a parent who is, going through a health issue and not being able to be right there. But I'm sure, you gave her a lot of comfort and assurances that everything was under control, which, is a great benefit to have, because so many families are scattered now, and it makes it a lot more challenging when you have to start helping provide support for a parent.
Totally.
So I noticed that you have quite a following on Instagram and TikTok. And what led you to kind of continue this advocacy for caregivers and care partners?
Yeah, I unintentionally started sharing about my mom on both forms of social media. I had a personal personal Instagram, and then my mom moved in with me, right? So I was sharing before she moved in, I was sharing what I was doing. Well, what I was doing led to caring for my mom. And what I found is as I shared my story, is I was connecting with people that were doing similar things. And I was showing a different side of dementia or Alzheimer's that people weren't seeing. There's a stigma around dementia and Alzheimer's, like we've talked about. And my goal after I started to kind of learn more about the stigma was to help to change that. Just because someone gets a dementia or Alzheimer's diagnosis, their life is not over. That doesn't mean there's no more joy. There's no more sunshine. Like my mom and I are proof that you can have so much fun, even post-diagnosis. I mean, my mom was pretty far along in her dementia and I took her to Disneyland, we were just living our best lives. And I shared it when she was alive because I think it's important to raise advocacy and give a positive face to a really scary disease. Right. And the more that we talk about it, the more that it becomes something that is important to others, right? The more that you share about it, the more that people can learn from you, the more that we can have research and we can continue to learn about it. I just think is so powerful.
I agree, and we've talked about it a couple of times now, but so many times I think families, because they're not aware, they're overwhelmed, and even sometimes in denial, they think life is over as soon as they get that diagnosis. And I mean, you're wonderful proof of the fact that you can still live that great life and enjoy and make new memories and have fun. It's, almost taking lemons and making lemonade.
Yeah.
What was your favorite trip? Because I know you've mentioned, you went to Disney World and different things. Do you have a favorite memory and a favorite trip that you and your mom went on?
Honestly, I think that my favorite trip was just we had gone up north, like we had done a little road trip and gone up north and stayed at a little lodge, and just we got to be on the ocean and we just got to spend time together. I mean, Disneyland was my goal as her care partner. As soon as she moved in with me, she had always wanted to go to Disneyland and it never happened. And so that was my goal, was to take her on an airplane, to do the whole thing. And that was beautiful and wonderful for the first 3 days, but then she got sick and then that kind of led to her decline and her passing. But I do think that the Disneyland, because it was such a goal for me, the fact that we were able to do that also holds such beautiful memories for me.
Wonderful. And I know I do want to mention real quickly, you talked about your Facebook group. We're going to post all of your links to your groups and to your social media platforms so that anyone listening or watching can reach out to you, follow you, and if they're a caregiver or a care partner, join your group.
Yeah.
What was that like when her health started to decline and you ultimately ended up bringing hospice in for support? What was that decision like, and what were those days like leading up to that?
Yeah. So when we were in Disneyland, she unfortunately got sick. She had a colitis flare up. But we were able to kind of get her back healthy and get her on the airplane home. And then once we got home, she just didn't get better. So then she ended up in the hospital for about a week, which with her, with her, how fragile she was and her type 1 diabetes. Became pretty complicated there.
Mm-hmm.
Hospitals are hard for everyone, but as many people know, like, hospitals are extremely hard for people living with dementia and Alzheimer's. So when she got out of the hospital, I just knew that going back to the hospital wasn't something that she had the strength for or I had the strength for. So when she got out of the hospital, I made the decision that I would call hospice on a Monday. I called hospice on a Monday. I didn't know if she would even qualify. They came out that following Thursday. She qualified on that Thursday, and then she actually passed 4 days later. So it was a very, very fast process. I mean, we left for Disneyland on February 28th, and she passed on March 28th. So it was like really fast. But yeah, I mean, I didn't even meet her hospice nurse until after she had, like, her official nurse until after she had passed. But I still am so thankful that those were the decisions I made, just because it was another layer of support.
Right.
I was able to bring in. And it was challenging, but just like I was transparent about the rest of my journey, I was pretty transparent about that part of my journey. And I continue to be as I talk about the grief that I'm experiencing.
Well, and that was my next question. If if you feel comfortable with sharing it, share how the grief process has been and how you're feeling, because it's been only a few months.
Yeah. I think that, just like people don't talk about dementia or Alzheimer's, they don't talk about the grief that you experience. So I experienced grief the whole time, right? I was losing pieces of my mom. That, anticipatory grief is real, but I almost felt like I'd have this feeling of relief, or this feeling of like, oh, I've already grieved for so long. Like, once she passed, it wasn't going to be as hard as it was. And it has been just as hard, if not harder, than I would have imagined. It's been such for me, it's been such a change. I was caring for her. So not only have I lost my mom, but I've kind of lost my purpose, right? Like, I had quit my job this last year so that I could care for her, because I couldn't do both. So then it's been this thing like, what do I even do? Who am I? Because my role had gotten so shifted into being her caregiver. I just feel like grief, no matter what, no matter if you expect it or don't expect it, is hard. And I think that that's another thing that people need to talk about, because the more that we talk about it, the more understanding and the more connected we can feel with each other. I had this beautiful opportunity this last weekend to go to a caregiver retreat that was put on by this company called No Barriers. And I connected, sadly, with someone that's the same age as me that has lost both of her parents in the last year, and one of them to dementia. And I just think that there is something about sharing your story and connecting with people who get it, because I have friends in my life who have lost parents or lost important people, but I don't have anyone in my life who's lost a parent to dementia or Alzheimer's. And I don't have anyone in my life who's lost both parents in the last 6 months. So the connection that you can get from this mutual understanding is so powerful and beautiful. So I'm going to keep sharing about grief, because it helps me. I'm processing it, but it's also giving others maybe a voice or the words to what they're experiencing as well.
Right. And Patti, I just want to end with a final question for viewers and listeners. What would be the one piece of care partner, caregiving advice you think is the most important?
Yeah. Find your support system. I think that is the most important. So whether your support system is people in your life, whether it's if you have siblings or if you have aunts or uncles or cousins, people that can help you, that is family, or your friends. My real life, not my online friends, were an amazing asset. I could call them. They would come sit with my mom. They would listen to me talk about it. Or find people that are in the same position as you and get it. Even if it's one other person, someone that understands how hard it is. There's just something different about watching your loved one lose all of their faculties, the first time I had to take my mom to the bathroom after she had a major accident in public was heartbreaking and hard and not fun. And I couldn't text my friends about it because they didn't get it. And also, do they really want to hear that? So having someone who's had the same experience, like texting them and being like, guess what happened? And they're like, oh, that's happened to me too. And just that understanding there's nothing like that for me. There was nothing that supported me as much as just being heard and being seen and knowing that I'm not alone. And so I would really encourage anyone, look on Facebook, look on local groups, look out there in the world, because there is, they say there's a lot of people that are doing the same thing as you. And so trying to find someone who understands it can be so powerful.
Absolutely. And I think that's great advice. And I just want to commend you for the remarkable job you did when your mother needed you and your dad. That's a hard position to find yourself in suddenly without any real warning. And I think you've led a great example for others to follow of, still living your days to the fullest that you can, because it's not the end. There's still a lot of joy to have and a lot of memories to make. And there will be bad days, but, make the best of it, and again, knowing that you're not alone, I think is so crucial when you find yourself as caring for a parent or a spouse or a child, because it can be a very isolating experience, and you need to reach out and look for those people and make those connections so that you can at least have somebody that can understand what you're going through. I think that's one of the most important aspects of the caregiving journey.
Yeah, I would agree.
Well, Patti, thank you so much for your time today and for joining us and for sharing the story about your mother and your experience. And I hope the viewers and listeners will reach out to you and take advantage of this support group that you have on Facebook and follow you on TikTok and Instagram.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to extend our thanks to Patti LaFleur for sharing her story of her mother and their care partner journey. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.